Somewhere in rural Nebraska in the late 1970s lived a rebellious teen who raced motorcycles on the weekend, pinned up the hemline of her school uniform on her walks to class, and once lobbed a chalk eraser so hard at her teacher during a Latin lesson that the hapless sister's habit flew off in front of God and all the terrible children of St. Albert's High School. Luckily, the Catholic community was spared further antics when their pull and pray method proved ineffective, and young Kathy was knocked up and permanently dismissed from campus. To say that motherhood was on the short list of activities Kathy would, should, or could engage in was about as ludicrous as proposing the Pope doesn't shit in the woods. Nevertheless, a child was born. Little Brooke was as sweet and lovable as any baby, but made the egregious error of incurring a cerebral palsy diagnosis later that year, and within a week, Kathy packed a bag and headed east, stopping only when she reached Marine Corps Recruiting Depot, Paris Island. Brooke's father had everything Kathy never had: a house, a job, an extended family, etc. The baby, she decided, would be better off without her. It wasn't long after Kathy enlisted that she found my father, a tall, handsome, but perhaps previously sheltered Marine, with a Calvinist work ethic and devotion to family and relationships that placed Kathy firmly at the center of his universe. They spent their precious free moments sailing the intercoastal waterway, fishing for flounder and plucking oysters straight from the sound to shuck with their pocket knives. They commiserated about the mandatory 10-mile runs through stifling humid swamps over bottles of cheap wine, watching the phosphorescence glow in the boat's wake, and letting the damp night breezes keep reality at bay for just a few more hours. Within a year, they were married, my father proposing to my mother on a fishing pier, offering the tab of a Schlitz can he had just popped open as an engagement ring. Shortly before their mandatory time in the Corps was up, Kathy was once again with child. To my detriment or advantage, she stuck around a bit longer this time, seeing things through all the way up to my preteen years. Now, my parents divorced when I was 9, and my mom decided I would be better off living with my dad, the guy with the house, the job, the extended family, etc. Frankly, I was totally fine with that decision. Dad was my fishing buddy. We went on adventures every weekend, exploring game lands with the dogs, jumping out of boats, or pulling dinner out of the Atlantic. He drove me to karate class, ballet practice, and saxophone lessons while Mom simmered on the couch under the weight of her depressive miasma. When they told me Mom was moving out and I'd be staying with Dad and the menagerie of animals I'd convinced them I needed to have, my reaction was something along the lines of, yeah, no shit. I'd be lying, though, if I said I wasn't at least a little bit traumatized when she never returned from a vacation to Ireland in the early 1990s. I was 11 or 12 at the time, the age when a girl could benefit from the presence of a female role model, no matter how subpar, and she just sort of disappeared into the ether one day. I spent many nights throughout my teenage years staring out over the ocean, my collie at my side, the dark crashing waves giving me a strange sort of strength. I was on a warm barrier island on the North Carolina coast, and I knew she was out there, on a colder, rockier island, probably living by the sea as well. I wondered how many more children she had had by that point. How many more times did she try to fill that aching void inside of her with another human's life? Was she still with them, or had they reached their expiration dates as well? Sometimes I would even ask these questions out loud, yelling into the winds, letting the waves swallow my screams. The ocean became my therapist because, as amazing and supportive as my father was, the subject of Kathy was never discussed. Like all good Dutch Americans, we suffer our emotions in silence, stewing under piles of work and whatever pleasant distractions we create for ourselves. I will never understand how the Dutch grow so tall under the weight of so many crosses and chips on their shoulders. One morning when I was 26 years old, I received a rather cryptic Facebook friend request. It was from someone with my mother's name, but instead of her birthday, she had listed mine. Well, that's weird. Confused, I looked at the invitation again and noticed that she had gotten my birth year wrong. Yep, sounds about right. It must be her. I sat there staring at the computer, trying to decide what to do, my blood boiling into a confusing cocktail of seething anger and a pathetic eagerness to forgive. So while the idea of hopping on the next flight to Ireland just to punch her in her whore mouth held more than its fair share of appeal, it was her next words that really sealed the deal. Come meet your brother and sister. Ah, shit. There are indeed others, and I suppose they might need me someday. In some ways, parenting is a lot like playing an acoustic guitar on a street corner or participating in stand-up comedy open mic night. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. That's not to say I begrudge her my existence. I'm certainly happy I'm here, but it definitely informed a very important decision I made pretty early in life. Never, ever would I entertain the thought of having children. Half of my genes are Kathy's, after all. What if I were to have a child and wake up one morning and think, fuck, this living, breathing organism that kickboxed the inside of my ribcage for 9 months and doesn't want to be more than 6 inches away from me would truly be better off without me. Now, the armchair psychologist in me would slap a borderline personality disorder diagnosis on my mom, and I was terrified I would wind up with my own mental illness that I stubbornly refused to acknowledge, inflicting a whole host of problems onto my spawn. Besides, a pregnancy would seriously cut into my raw cheese and alcohol consumption, and who has time for that? Not to mention that with procreation comes myriad responsibility. Suddenly there's a tiny creature that needs to be fed and comforted, whose ass needs to be wiped almost continuously, and who creates more questions than answers the older they get. Is she getting enough to eat? How high a fever is too high? Oh my God, is she dying? Where did that pen cap go? Did she swallow it? Oh my God, is she dying? Did she just eat a bowl of cat food? Did she just pee on the cat? How many glasses of wine can you drink per night before failing your child? How many glasses of wine can you drink per night before your liver fails? All these countless tasks fall under one actual job. Just don't leave them hanging. See things through to the end and make sure everyone comes out okay. And since I knew firsthand what kind of a flight risk my mother could be, I felt a panicky need to develop some sort of relationship with my siblings ASAP. The first time I visited Ireland, it became clear that my 9-year-old sister was already worried about Mom pulling a disappearing act on them too. What if she thinks we'll be better off with someone else and runs away? Andrea asked me one night. Don't worry, sweet pea, I promise that will never happen. I tried to sound comforting. Why? Because we don't have a father? She could arrange to have us adopted. No, dear, because she'd get deported if she had to show ID to an authority. There wasn't a chance in hell that woman went through any legal channels of immigration, and that logic seemed to put little Andrea's mind at ease, at least for the time being. Over the course of the next decade, I maintained as much of a presence in my siblings' lives as I could, being on a different continent and all. We chatted almost every day, Andrea updating me on the dramas of middle and high school life, and Justin describing his rugby victories. They also recounted their latest evictions, how they frequently had to pack up and leave town under the cover of night, and how they had never gone to the same school for more than 1 year at a time. Through these little chats and annual visits around Christmas time, I had a pretty clear window into their lives. The story that unfolded over the course of several years was that as a woman who was obviously very ill, but who refused to accept help or see a doctor. Kathy saw as the acts of what her children experienced as lies, manipulations, and psychological abuse, Kathy saw as the acts of a free spirit and an artist whom no one understood. When you don't stay in one place long enough to absorb external influence, it becomes pretty easy to create your own reality. 6 years ago, my cats and I headed west, looking for adventure and a reprieve from oppressive humidity. 5 years ago, I got married because I've never been one to approach change in a small way. 3 years ago, I forgot to take a birth control pill. I missed one fucking pill. Subsequently, a little over 2 years ago, I popped out a wondrous little whim fruit of my own. At this point, Kathy had receded far back into the shadows of my life, but she did manage to procure some sort of documents that enabled Andrea to get dual citizenship and come live with us in the States for a while. I sure didn't know how to raise a child, so adding one more family member to the proverbial village seemed like a good place to start. That's not to say I was trying to win any medals. The entire labor and childbirth was as medically induced and drug-laden as possible. I had never felt terror like the one that clamped my loins as the attending nurse said, you're already over 6 centimeters dilated. We really don't like to administer epidurals after 7, and I'm not sure where the anesthesiologist is. But my cervix goes up to 11, I deadpanned. She gave me a blank stare. Just give me the fucking drugs, please. I asked as nicely as I could, while visions of being torn apart, ass to tits, and actually having to feel it were dancing through my head. Andrea was there with me through the entire process, feeding me chipped ice, at 19 years old, already exhibiting more grace and maternal instinct than our mother ever managed to muster. That's not to say she attempted in any way, shape, or form to hide the sheer horror she was experiencing. She never asked to see the only stable human in her life being ripped in half and shitting herself in a hospital bed. If her experiences with Mom hadn't already turned her off of having a family, I guarantee I put the final nail in that coffin. And I suppose we never truly know the damage we inflict on other people. And I'm sure my little Freya will have plenty of stories about how much of a Looney Tune her mother is. But she'll also be solidly aware that her parents actually really like being around her. I know we'll drive each other crazy, and I'll mess up 1,000 times over the years, as is evidenced by the fact that I've heard her say, "Ah, shit," no fewer than 20 times this week alone. But toddler pee is actually pretty easy to wash off a cat. And my jeans and the couch and the living room window and our brand new hammock. So we'll all push through this phase of scatological slip-ups, and I'll always remain present, fueled by that Calvinist work ethic and more than a little wine, fulfilling that one real job every parent has, just being there and seeing things through.
Vamp first timer Brandy